Video games can introduce themselves in a lot of different ways. Some games like to give you just a little bit of narrative before booting you out into the action as soon as possible. Some games opt for a more cinematic approach, taking their time to set up the context in the story while showing off their graphics a little bit at the same time. Some games have you make your character, or select some skills, or answer some questions, romance you a little bit before throwing you deep into the horrors of the housing market.
Oh my god!
And some games don't got no intro at all. You just put some coins in the coin hole and start dancing your ass off like the golden god you really are. As time marches on, I grow more and more interested with how different games choose to handle their opening moments. How they choose to say hello to the player. Like literature's iconic opening lines or cinema's famous opening sequences, a game can communicate a lot to a player through a first impression, or a first handful of impressions, depending on what you really count as an intro. Is an intro the opening cinematic, the title screen, the first few minutes of gameplay, the first hour of gameplay, the first mission? What about a coordinated hip-hop number, introducing each of the main characters and going down in the history books of memeology?
Walnuts, peanuts, pineapple smells, grape melons, oranges, and coconut shells. Oh yeah!
See, there's more going on in a video game than in other kinds of media, and while books and movies can get all fancy and experimental with it if they really want to, there are generally a few good principles they can adhere to more or less stick the landing. But games don't have it so easy. A video game juggles a lot, and sometimes must communicate a lot, in those first few impressions, which gets even trickier when you consider that not all gamers are created equally. One player's time to kick back and enjoy an opening cutscene is another player's 5-minute window to take a dank rip of Baja Blast from their gamer gear. Some players might want to tinker over creating their character for upwards to 30 minutes, getting every detail right like they're chiseling some kind of David statue, and other players just hit the randomizer button and start hitting homers. Ask each of these gamers what the intro was, and they might have totally different answers. Another thing to think about is that video game intros are sometimes necessarily minimalistic, depending on what era of gaming you're focusing on. I mean, they used to put crucial story details in the manuals, and if you never read them, you might not know why Donkey Kong fans posit that WizPig actually came to Earth as part of the 1947 Roswell incident. And even when video game technology did allow for more narrative freedom, some games still chose to just set you in front of a castle and say, there you go, have fun, go be a Super Mario. There's not a one-size-fits-all method here, and that's why this particular aspect of game design is so interesting to me. So much can go right, so much can go wrong, so much can leave an indelible mark on our little gamer brains. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Video game intros. And just to be clear, I'm not here to split hairs or set any definitions in stone. This isn't a college course. I'm not here to tell you that Glover's intro sucks, or to make fun of Sonic 06's opening, or to give you an academic game design breakdown on the concept of conveyance in level 1-1 of Super Mario Bros. I'm here to hang out like one of the guys and talk about tutorials. I'm here to hang loose and talk about some sick-ass ways that games have introduced themselves to the player. So grab a plate of lasagna or a double vodka tonic and strap in, because this video is going to be longer than a roll of Disney film strip. Number 1, intro movies. If we want to talk about video game intros, we have to start at the beginning. And the truth of the matter is that sometimes a video game intro isn't the first level. Sometimes it isn't the title screen. Sometimes it isn't even the box art if you bought the thing used. Sometimes the first thing a gamer sees when they pop in that disc, or legally obtain that ISO, or download that limited release from a kiosk at a convenience store in Kyoto, is the intro movie. Now let me first just say that I know there are a lot of hairs to split when it comes to intro movies and title screens and attract modes, so if I accidentally blur some lines here, forgive me. These three things are all basically distant cousins, but I'm going to try to focus more on the intro movie side of things. And I'll also say specifically that I'm not talking about a game's first cutscene, but the movie that plays before or during the title screen. Anyway, I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, I loved watching intro movies in video games. Whether it was the disco party in Star Wars Rogue Squadron 3, the Run DMC snowboarding music video in SSX Tricky, Ocarina of Time's wistful gallop across Hyrule Field, or even just a generic display of gameplay, I watched these almost every time I booted up a game. It was like playing a video game and watching TV at the same time. I mean, half the reason I would rent Donkey Kong 64 when I was a kid was to watch the DK rap over and over and turn my volume down when they said hell so my mom wouldn't hear.
This Kong, one hell of a guy.
Obviously nowadays watching games is just as popular as playing them, but I think gamers always enjoyed the opportunity to kick back and let gaming be more of a viewing experience. There wasn't like a Spyro TV show, but sometimes it could be cool to let the Spyro Attract mode take you on a little journey. And I know I said this wouldn't be academic, but I do love that those little demos of gameplay are called Attract modes, and they're the true granddaddy of all intro movies. Back in the day, plenty of gamers would stare down the same arcade cabinets day after day, tossing their coins in the same old slots. But if you were a game developer, you had to find a way to stand out in that cacophony of bells and whistles and pixels. You had to find a way to be the most tantalizing voice among the many sirens. Thus, you had to be attractive. I actually used to watch Attract mode sometimes just to see what was maybe around the corner in whatever game I was playing. I can always remember seeing this guy in the Banjo-Tooie Attract mode go, "Hi!" but I could only find him through the window in the actual game. How do I get over there? But another thing you gotta remember about intros is that depending on the genre, some games, like fighting games or sports games or puzzle games, they don't exactly have a chance to woo you on the first level. There's not like any kind of spatial spectacle or unique scenario they can throw you in right off the bat to really hook you. And there's not any kind of tutorial or extended opening sequence that they can get creative with to make you say, "Thank you, Toby Fox." See, in some genres, the gameplay is like this, and it's gonna be like this from the beginning of the game to the end. Because of this, plenty of games rely on their intro movies to spice things up a bit and show off those three-dimensional calves up close. You know, there are some games where, when I think of them in my memory, I think of their opening movies before I even think of their gameplay. And it's not that the gameplay wasn't good or anything, just that the intro movie made such an impression. Jedi Power Battles, the EA Sports series, SSX Tricky, Tekken 2, and Budokai 2, and even Spider-Man 2. All of these games have a special fondness in my memory because of how fun the introductory cinematics were. Okay, to be fair, I love SSX Tricky and will never forget it, but its opening movie was also one of the hardest things I had ever seen when I was a 7-year-old. I'm pretty sure Final Fantasy VIII forces you to sit through some weird cross between AMV and outright psychedelia before you even get to play the game. And for better or for worse, that kind of stuff sticks with you. It sets the tone. Some intro movies even offer some exposition for the plot, which isn't necessarily cool on its own, seeing as usually the exposition is repeated in the actual game, but it can be an interesting part of the experience if they also introduce the player to, say, the game's visual aesthetic, or if they present the information in a cool way. I also like the little slices of life you get from intro movies. How else am I gonna know what fighting game characters do on their days off? Or, in the case of Mother 3's scrapped Attract mode, you get to see more of what Tazmily Village was like before Mother 3 happened to it. But combine a good opening movie with a fun menu gimmick, and now we're getting into true spicy territory. If you get tricky with this stuff, a game can really cement itself in a player's memory before they even do anything in the actual game. And by this same method, a game can also hide some of its flaws with a little bit of flair. For example, I know these graphics look pretty rough nowadays, but one of my favorite games to play at my friends' houses was always Jedi Power Battles. Because when you're 7 years old and in the first real throes of love for Star Wars, there's nothing cooler than watching a CGI Plo Koon stab a battle droid in all its pre-rendered graphical glory, or having Mace Windu stare directly into your soul. Well, there was actually one thing cooler, and it was selecting your character. There's all these badass Jedi standing around with their lightsabers already drawn and ready to fight, and when you hover over them, they all move a little bit.
Oh no, oh no!
Okay, I can see how this character selection screen in this opening movie might make you roll your eyes, but this is why video game intros interest me so much. Plenty of my love for this game is just pure nostalgia. I'm not gonna argue against that. And Jedi Power Battles does kind of suck, objectively.
What?
It doesn't handle well, and kids like me who liked it probably liked it so much because kids couldn't recognize a shitty game if it Wiimoted its way through the TV screen. But the thing to note here is that an opening cinematic is a video game's chance to convince you it's a big tough guy, even if it really just has SpongeBob's blow-up muscle arms. And say what you will about Power Battles, and say what you will about nostalgia, but in the year 2000, seeing this many lightsabers on one screen was basically magic to any Star Wars fan. If the game booted up to this, and the character select screen looked like this, Power Battles might look more like Power Cattles. You know, because it's boring. But if I had to pick the crown jewel of video game opening cinematics, like the true Mac Daddy of the industry, I gotta give it to Melee, baby. Everybody who knows me knows I love Melee, even if I'm absolute trash at the game, but god damn it did this intro blow my mind the first time I saw it, and I still love watching it to this day. The pacing, the framing, the chaos, the characterization, everything that's special about the Smash Bros. Series is here in this intro, and the graphics absolutely hold up. And I mean, sure, nowadays I love Melee for the forbidden technology that Nintendo doesn't want you to see, but when I first saw this cinematic in 2003, after playing Smash 64 for the past 4 years, I sat there content in my little gamer dungeon and figured it doesn't get any better than this. This had to be the peak of graphics. This had to be the peak of gameplay. This had to be the peak of Yoshi physics. And you know what? Seeing as people still play this game and adore it, maybe I was right. Maybe this was the peak. Come on, I don't care who you are. I don't care if you're casual. I don't care if you're a competitive degenerate. I don't care if you're a SpongeBob main in the Nickelodeon fighting game. This intro movie is so damn good. It's got the Ridley part, it's got the Zelda part with the violins, and it's got the ice climbers falling down the mountains, and then Ness shoots across the sidewalk. There's a reason people lost their minds when they saw this for the first time. You can hear them call out character names as they appear on the screen. You can feel the sheer excitement in that room. This intro movie is pre-rendered adrenaline. I know that later Smash Bros. Games would really lean into the whole epic angle of the series, like with Brawl's theme song and Mario always looking pissed off. And of course in the latest game, there's more of a focus on fan service and outright quantity of content, which is exciting for plenty of people. But something is so sick about Melee that it seemed epic without really trying to be. Melee always just seemed cool. It seemed confident in that let's just put everyone in the same room and see what happens kind of way. Something about Melee's wild, badass, fast-paced intro, with so many of the characters getting their own chance to shine, is what makes it stand the test of time for me. And like I said, I'm a dirty wave dasher nowadays, but I also still love Melee just as a game, not solely a competitive outlet. And so much of that love was born right here in this intro. And don't get me wrong, I love fighting game intros. I could watch them on a loop. Really, any cinematic in a fighting game is just a whole vibe for me. Even the animated intros for games like Dragon Ball Z Budokai 2 are really something special. In games like this, there are really only like a few fighter templates, and a lot of the characters play very similarly, and I don't know, basically the core concept of this game is to beat Goku or Vegeta and beat the shit out of everybody. But every few years I still look up these intro movies just to enjoy them. They're really well done, and they pay a great homage to the series that they represent. But no matter how wild Smash reveal trailers get, or how good fighting game graphics get, my heart still skips a little beat to this day when I see Link strike the Master Sword into the ground, ready to throw hands with Mario and Pikachu and Kirby. It's one of the closest things I know to real video game magic. Number 2, how to play. Now that we've talked about intro movies, I'm gonna talk about tutorials. I'm mostly skipping over title screens because I don't think I can add too much more to the conversation, but if I were to say a little bit on title screens and their close step-sibling file select screens, I'd say that while I personally prefer a minimalist take, like a Final Fantasy or Zelda title screen, I also love something that's a bit more playful in tone, like GoldenEye or Banjo-Kazooie. As Naked Jacob points out, title screens do so much heavy lifting when it comes to saying hello to a player, and because plenty of gamers mash their way through intro movies, for a lot of people this is where game and gamer first really meet. And I think as long as a developer doesn't overthink the title screen, you can't really go too wrong. It's always a plus when there's a fun element, like getting out of the chair in Black Ops. Honestly, I don't think there even needs to be a gimmick or anything cute going on. Paper Mario 64 always comes to mind for me when I think of title screens. Nothing crazy going on here, just colorful, fun design that perfectly matches the game's storybook style. Similarly, Halo didn't exactly reinvent the wheel to leave a lasting impression. Bungie just got some cool backgrounds in an ambient choir of monks and permanently stamped these title screens onto gamer brains for a generation, right next to the Mountain Dew XXP tattoos. If there's anything else I could add here that would also work as a slick little transition into tutorials, I'd say that I like how a lot of games nowadays, whether or not they have a cool title screen at all, are doing more interesting things with what happens after you press start. In God of War 4, it's a seamless transition from title screen to gameplay, and in Gungeon, you have this pretty nice title screen that drops you here, this cold, weird underworld, where you're free to explore and see what's going on and talk to a few NPCs, or just run right into the bullet hell, triggering a how to play that is basically an extended baptism by fire as you learn this game's punishing mechanics. Fellow roguelite Hades tweaks the concept. The first time you boot up the game, it actually just throws you right into your first run, right into the action, and you're greeted with the hub world the first time you ever die in an attempt to escape, well, like Gungeon, the underworld. This is a side note, but I can't wait for someone to subvert this blood, guts, and hell aesthetic. Like, everything is all demons and devils and eldritch bitches, but you know, someone is gonna come along eventually and have like a puppy playtime roguelike, or something where you start off as a handsome little doggy and just become more and more dolled up and infinitely powerful. Or maybe like a unicorn roguelike, that'd be sick. Okay, anyway, I chose roguelites to ever so smoothly transition out of our talk about title screens because I kind of hate tutorials. I mean, yeah, there's a way to make them fun, there's a way to spruce them up, there's a way to make it like a part of the game's world, like that training area in Modern Warfare 2, or add a little self-awareness about it like that cocky narrator in the Spider-Man games.
Now, you are the little red dot, and your target is blue, so now's your chance to self-test for color blindness. Anyway,
But for my money, the best type of tutorial is an invisible one. And I know I said I wasn't going to talk about conveyance, but I started writing this section after writing the rest of the script, and then I was having a lot of fun and I couldn't stop, so just forgive me, just allow me this one slip up, okay? If you hit that subscribe button, I promise I'll never lie to you again. Anyway, I guess the way I see it, there's kind of like two types of tutorials. There's one, the invisible tutorial, that's more common in games like platformers, but it's not exclusive to this genre. This type of tutorial is something that progresses naturally as you play, building on concepts level after level and giving the player occasional guidance when like a heady new concept is introduced. I'll never forget my first few runs through the original Binding of Isaac. I knew nothing about the game. I didn't even know the mechanics of a roguelite because I had never played one before. I remember going through each room so slowly. I held on to all my money. I grew attached to my items, as if I was playing a dungeon in The Legend of Zelda, which Isaac had clearly taken some visual inspiration from. But then I died and lost everything, and I was like, what the hell? What just happened? I don't want to play this if I'm just going to lose my stuff every time I die. But I did play again and again, and I died so many times in this game, over and over, learning how it worked one run at a time. And each time I got a little farther and a little farther, and I realized the game had been teaching me all along, not just about its weird lore, but about how to play and what to value. See, some games' tutorials are like a literal thing. Like, you've got to do it, and there's menus on the screen and button diagrams and whatnot, and like, you can't progress in the game unless you herd all the cows into the cow house.
Cow house?
Yeah, where they live. The cows.
But Isaac's tutorial is really just like your first 15 runs. Its instructions are a very prolonged, slow, torturous death, where every new enemy and every new boss scares the hell out of you until finally you become accustomed to this evil place. And then eventually you have the basics down, and you get better at learning the enemy patterns, and finally you have a run where you're taking less damage, and boom, you unlock a devil deal, baby, and the game's scope grows that much wider, because now when the player is confident in themselves, they have to make decisions about what items to take, what items to keep, and what items to risk it all for. I think some games make the mistake of using tutorials as a way to front load the game's introduction and to cover all of its bases. They want you all tidied up and ready to go, so that the only thing you ever have to call home for is to say I miss you. But a tutorial doesn't have to be just the first 20 minutes, or even the first level. I think my favorite type of tutorial is kind of like a courting phase between the game and the gamer. Get to know each other and get comfortable and kiss a little bit, and then finally the chains are gone and you're deep in the gameplay. Obviously there are different versions of this, and some tutorials are just a sequence of levels that build the game's mechanics with patience. Other tutorials are more on the rails sorts of things that you just can't escape. But in my opinion, a game that combines these two concepts really well, and one of the only times I've ever really noticed myself appreciating a tutorial, was in the Klonoa re-release. I had never played these games before, so I had no nostalgia for them, and I loved the amazing combination of both hands-on and hands-off tutorializing that that this re-release manages. I had heard that some fans thought the remake held your hand too much or interrupted with tutorials too often, but for me, playing the game for the first time on stream while also interacting with chat, the balance was perfect because Klonoa isn't your typical platformer. The mechanics of picking up enemies and using them for double jumps and then jumping in the air and grabbing another enemy and getting another jump, and also learning to be cognizant of the game's 2.5D elements, these are all core mechanics that Klonoa eases you into, not just on the first level, but the first few sections of levels. The boss fights and level structures build upon themselves so naturally, and by the time you have to manage this 2.5D concept in a boss fight, you're a pro at it without the game ever really telling you anything. But because Klonoa is unique in the platforming genre, I just really appreciated these little hand-holding elements. And just to be clear, I also think tutorials are important, and some of them have no choice but to exist how they do. I'm not like anti-tutorial, okay? Some games have a lot to teach the player. Also, gamers come in all different shapes and sizes and abilities, and I can't tell you how many times as a young kid I had to stop playing a game because I hadn't properly grasped the mechanics. Kid modes aren't just for kids, you know. Sometimes it's okay for someone to say, Mega Man, and just lay things out for you. Sometimes. We all know that Super Mario 64 was a landmark title in 3D gaming or whatever, but I think a big reason for this isn't solely the fact that it was a great game and one of the first of its kind. I think a big reason people love this game so much is that you just press start and you're playing. I mean, Peach's head is like looming in the sky and she's baking a cake or whatever, but for the most part, you just jump out of a pipe and you start running around. There was no boring on-the-rails tutorial section where Lakitu makes sure you can jump right. Everyone who has played this game since 1996, or when did this shit come out? Hold on. Yeah, I knew it, 1996. I knew I wasn't an idiot. Everyone who has played this game since 1996, even though they have all traversed the same area, have had the opportunity to feel like their journey was unique. You just start going. That's probably why the copypasta conspiracy of Mario 64 copies being personalized exists in the first place, because the experience itself can feel so personal, and the memories can become so vivid, even if they are misremembered. Mario 64's intro chose to be open-ended, presenting players with the safe jungle gym that was the outside of Peach's castle. You can't die out here unless you get really creative about it. There are no enemies. The only place you can fall is in a body of water, which itself is another tutorial, how to swim. Even if you skip all this stuff, there's still more rooms to get through before you ever get to an official first level. Despite this, the moment-to-moment gameplay itself never suffers. I'm sure there's like a toad somewhere who tells you can jump into paintings, but I imagine most gamers found this out just by jumping around. Plenty of games from this era found interesting ways to blur the lines of tutorial and freedom. Banjo-Kazooie, one of Mario 64's competitors for the best N64 platformer, was pretty ahead of its time in making the tutorial optional. And it's kind of perfect because Banjo-Kazooie is different from Mario 64. There's a lot more to do with button combinations with the C and Z buttons, and more moves to memorize that accomplish specific things. Because of this, a first-time player almost needs to learn the controls, but a confident player, or a returning veteran, can skip right over this and let the three-pronged N64 abomination be the only teacher they need. Speaking of eldritch bitches, I gotta say, another standout for me is Final Fantasy VI, which both nails a cold, careful, serious tone and also serves as a passive tutorial for anyone who ain't never played a Final Fantasy before. You walk around in these big mech suits and it's impossible for you to be defeated, so if anyone has never played an RPG or navigated a battle menu like this, it's their chance to learn. There's no way you can lose these fights, so they're both tutorial and storytelling device. Plus, with pretty amazing music and a mysterious inciting incident, you're left much more excited than you might be than if, you know, the king calls you a chosen one or whatever. Plenty of tutorials are a balancing act. What's too little? What's too much? What works for the game? What works for the player? What if someone misses the tutorial and gets totally lost and confused? How do you please the veterans and newcomers alike in a series like, say, Dark Souls? And then you have a game like Breath of the Wild that lets the player loose in a sense, but really contains you to just one section of land until you're ready for the wider world. This whole first hour is a tutorial, but it doesn't really feel like one, especially because many of the problems have multiple solutions. This is all mostly par for the course if you look at the original Zelda, or even A Link to the Past, which are both great at throwing the player right into the action. In this same series, however, are the notoriously slow tutorials of Skyward Sword and Twilight Princess, And though folks like King K have argued on Twilight Princess's behalf, saying that the slow start ultimately serves the narrative, I can say with certainty that the slow boils of these games have kept me from replaying them countless times. I feel fatigued before I even get to the meat of the game. I can still remember watching my sister, a lifelong Zelda fan, struggle with boredom through Skyward Sword's introduction, asking me when it would be over and she could finally play the game. I always thought it was too bad that these two Zelda games limited the player like this, because this is something that Zelda figured out 2 decades ago with Ocarina of Time. And I'm not trying to continue a 2-decade-long tradition of praising this game, but it is also a king of the invisible tutorial. You're free to talk with the Kokiri, learning little tricks of the trade as you go, learning how to cut grass, but you don't have to, and if you don't, they still function as a lovely backdrop to make the Kokiri Forest feel that much more like home. Whether they're teaching you how to pick up rocks or just functioning as your forest neighbors, they enrich the world of Hyrule from the game's opening moments, making it feel like it's full of life. I kind of wonder how Twilight Princess or Skyward Sword could have gone if they went for something more like this. Present the player with these open environments, let them play around in them, and just see where they go. Maybe at some point you stumble upon a first dungeon, or trigger the inciting incident. I don't know, I struggle replaying these games, and I think this is why. I just go in knowing that first 30 or 40 minutes is going to be pretty boring. You know, I said at the start of this video that a video game intro can be a first level or a first 20 minutes, but depending on how deep the gameplay is and how deep the systems go therein, an intro or tutorial really can be your entire first playthrough. I'm not trying to get too heady here, just stick with me on this. My roommate has been on a big Dark Souls kick lately, and there have been multiple times where he gets super far into the game, even to the final boss, only to restart and try something new. When I ask him why he does this, he always says he only just realized a better way to play or to build his character. By the same token, I guess a game like Call of Duty can throw in a tutorial for shooting targets or whatever, but for some people the true tutorial is an entire first playthrough on a casual setting. Your second playthrough is when you're really playing. And like I said above, just look at Undertale. This game has probably the most creative introduction and tutorial I've played in years, at least in the RPG genre. It constantly subverts your expectations, it makes you laugh, it pokes fun at its own genre. It also takes itself just seriously enough and establishes a living, breathing world and story, with so many things done in a beautifully subtle manner. When you replay this intro, it's like having some kind of spiritual epiphany. It's like walking for the first time. And don't lie to me. I know you killed Toriel. We all killed Toriel. You don't go into Undertale knowing how to play Undertale, but you also do, because learning the system and being affected by its consequences is an integral part to the experience of what Undertale is. You're supposed to fail. You're supposed to want to play again, knowing what you know now. Anyway, I can tell this section is getting a little too experimental, and it won't be too long until I'm talking about scientific concepts I don't understand. So I'll just say here that a video game tutorial can be anything from a stepping stone to a roadblock, from a first run down the course to a series of pit stops. For my money, it's in a game's best interest to trust the player, to let the introduction of the game be something that happens on the player's terms. Oh, and let there be a cool startup sound like the Windows pinball game. Number 3, Mamma Mia, here I go again. Okay, I can feel my ADHD kicking in, so now that we've talked about some pre-game cinematics and we've talked about tutorials, I think it'll be for the best if I just start looking at some specific games. We can talk about generalities all day, but I'd rather look at some actual examples and explicate what makes them fun. So where we dropping, boys? Not here. Not here. How about here? 1989. Year of the Snake, the shoulder pad, and the Game Boy. Back in the 80s, game intros really weren't much to look at. In fact, they barely existed at all. Plenty of games just started. You pressed a button and off you went. Even games that did offer exposition were pretty straightforward about it. Most of the flashiness and fanfare was in the title screen, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I love a straightforward start. I love a platformer that just goes. An RPG that tells me I'm a hero of light and packs all the lore in the instruction manual. I don't need anything fancy as long as it doesn't take too long to get into a cave and start killing slimes. But as more time passes, the more I understand why the original Mother was such a big deal for its time, and why it was so impressive passive to gaming 5 heads like Shigeru Miyamoto and Satoru Iwata. As I'm sure you can guess by looking at my channel, I kind of like the Mother series. Both Earthbound and Mother 3 were instant classics for me. I was hooked from the opening moments of each game, and as I've gotten older, it has become apparent to me why the games are considered so unique in the history of gaming. However, the original Mother is a game that took me a little while to understand. I mean, I liked it as part of the series, with it being basically a little prototype for ideas that would be more deeply explored in Earthbound, and I also liked it for its dungeon crawling aspects, as, like I said, I really do enjoy an old salty NES RPG every now and again. I guess I just didn't get why it was so well loved when it came out. I mean, on an intellectual level, sure, I get it, we all know the story. In the age of Dragon Quests and Final Fantasies and Zeldas, there was Mother, an RPG in a contemporary setting. You can smoke a cigarette with a crow, you can fight a car, you can buy a burger, you can blow up a science lab and die. So zany and random, someone grab me a spork before I lose my goddamn mind. However, on a recent playthrough of the game, I think I finally discovered what made Mother so cool when I considered its introduction. It starts off similarly to other RPGs of its age, with some brief textual exposition. Whereas other games would foretell of heroes of light or balls of light, Mother begins by mentioning a strange disappearance and an odd study of PSI. From the beginning of the game, Mother leans into both a more human and a more mysterious story than its contemporaries, all with some mystery sprinkled in. Pretty cool, pretty nice, definitely a fun play on your typical 80s RPG setup, but it's not what we're here to talk about. See, then the text crawl ends. We shoot 80 years into the present, and we're in a bedroom. Nothing too crazy going on. You're a boy, a cool guy, chillin'. But then you get out of bed, walk toward the door. No big deal. We're still just walking, just playing the game, and holy rigatoni, you're getting attacked by your own lamp that flies across the room and hits you in the back of the head. Suddenly, we're in the midst of battle. You fight off the lamp, trading blows and working your way through the rest of the house. But then bang, there's another one in your little sister's room, and now the music is going all wacko and making all headphone users assuredly rest in peace. There's an immediacy from the get-go that isn't present even in some RPGs nowadays, and one battle leads to the next until you're fighting this creepy-ass Cupid doll and defending your other little sister. Hell, your entire family from this Poltergeist-inspired opening sequence. All of this culminates when you examine the doll, and the entire screen erupts into brief, melodic psychedelia as the first few notes of a melody ring out to you and embed themselves into your memory. From here, you grab your grandpa's journal, talk to the dog, exchange profanities with a rat, hit the road, and your journey begins. I mean, look, I don't have any issues with "it's dangerous to go alone, take this," and by all means, those 6 words are far more iconic and influential for most gamers than anything going on in Mother. But dude, come on, the lamp flies across the room and hits you in the head, and the music is crazy, and there's a weird doll and the trippy screen thing, and there's a crazy shit going on in here. I think it's also worth pointing out the characterization we get here. Ninten's mom wishing the father was around, the father having an inkling of what might be going on, the father, of course, having tragically been turned into a phone.
Where you at, dog?
I'm not saying this intro needs to knock your socks off like it's done to mine. I'm not saying I don't ultimately prefer intros like Donkey Kong blasting out of his house and whooping ass in 6 seconds flat. And there ain't nothing wrong with a normal text crawl either. With that being said, Mother is the true sock knocker offer for me, and if anyone happens to see where my socks went, I would appreciate it. But what I'm really getting at here is that I've played a lot of NES games in my day. I've played the classics, I've played the Jurassics, I've subjected myself to Castlevania and all of its evil incarnations. I've cried while trying to beat Star Tropics, and I just can't think of any game from this time that establishes itself as ambitiously or as stylistically as Mother does. It's clear to me, even in 1989, Shigesato Itoi had a cinematic vision for his game, and cinematic isn't exactly a term that goes hand in hand with the NES. And yeah, these graphics are a little, you know, they are what they are, okay? I mean that's a dog. That's not a bird, that's actually a dog. So like that's going on. But I'm not saying Mother is cinematic in the same way that games are cinematic nowadays, or in the ways later entries in the Mother series would earn their cinematic moments. But given the limitations in the hardware, I think it's pretty incredible what Itoi and his team managed to pull off in the 80s with Mother. I think it's amazing what the game can make the player feel, despite its limitations. And again, can you think of any game that even tries to go for something like this back in the day? When I think of atmospheric RPGs, I'm usually starting at like 1994 at the earliest. An introduction says a lot about a game, and in this case, Mother's introduction says it isn't like what has come before it. It's gonna be more E.T. than LOZ. It might look like other RPGs sometimes, and it might play like them too, but from those opening minutes, Mother was on a mission to stand out from the rest of the pack, beginning a legacy that would define two beloved sequels and a fan base that's passion seems to know no bounds. Well, what else should we talk about? I like that Spider-Man game that opens with a bank robbery, with Spider-Man creeping around in the vents and saving the hostages one by one. You know, Spider-Man technology has come pretty far since then, and my personal favorite of the Spider-Man games is the Ultimate Spider-Man, which itself has a great opening. But I think this game did something pretty cool by having you climb around in an enclosed space to pick off guys just like Spidey might have to do in a tense situation. Of course, credit should always be given to the original BioShock for its brilliant descent into madness, a wicked twist on an Alice in Wonderland scenario. And I'll even throw a bone to old school RuneScape's Tutorial Island, a goofy little place where plenty of middle schoolers have learned the basics of three-dimensional point-and-click games. I like Banjo-Tooie's opening cutscene, I like that Elder Scrolls game with the trains in it, I like how Mother 3 starts on a quaint little farm only to rip it all away in like 10 minutes. I don't know, I just like intros, man. But you know what? There are only a few minutes left in this video, and you might be thinking, did I just watch this dude spend 30 minutes setting up a premise only to talk about Mother and then peace out? What the hell? But to that, as always, I'll say, here's the hell. I'm only just getting started. There's so much more I want to talk about. I want to talk about real cinematic intros, not just 8-bit lamps flying around. I want to talk about World War II and Mario's Missing and Fall Damage, and how all of these things can inform a video game's introduction to the player. And if you're wondering why I talked about intro movies but not opening cinematics, well, there's a reason for that too. It's just that the script kind of got away from me. I looked at a 29-page single-space document and I thought, oh great, a minute per page. That'll be like a 30-minute video. Awesome. But as usual, I forgot that I am a dumb human, and I just couldn't fit everything into this one. I mean, I could, but I started to get the sense that the pacing was breaking down, so we're gonna end this one here for today. Consider this only an intro to my discussion about intros. Another video will be in the pipeline very soon, at least faster than my previous longer video. I swear I did not mean for this to take over 5 months. So just hang tight, and before you know it, I promise I'll be back to trick you into listening to me talk about the Mother series all over again.